Karen always said my daughter was too spoiled. But the day she stormed into the school and broke my 7-year-old's arm with a hammer, something inside me shattered too. Teachers screamed, children froze in terror, and on Karen's face was a strange smile, like she believed she had just won. She thought I was just another ordinary father, someone she could bully and walk over with her power. But what she didn't know, I'm the FBI police chief, and the father she chose to provoke won't rest until justice is done. Before the story unfolds, comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable stories. When I first drove through Maple Ridge, it looked like a picture pulled straight out of a real estate brochure. Rows of identical houses gleamed in the afternoon sun. Lawns were clipped so evenly they could have been trimmed with a ruler. Every mailbox gleamed, every hedge had the same height, and the white picket fences looked freshly painted. After 15 years of service and too many nights away from home, I wanted peace for my 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. She'd been through enough hospital visits and whispered stares from strangers because of her wheelchair. Maple Ridge looked calm, safe, the kind of place where a little girl could laugh without fear. The realtor's voice still rings in my ears. You'll love it here. Tight-knit community, very family-friendly. The HOA keeps everything in perfect order. That perfect order part should have been my first warning. The first few weeks were bliss. Sophie spent her afternoons drawing chalk hearts on the driveway. Our Labrador, Max, snoozed on the porch, and I finally felt like life had slowed to a manageable rhythm. Neighbors waved when I passed. Kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac. For the first time in years, I thought, maybe this is home. Then came Karen Miller. She was impossible to miss. Immaculate blonde hair, a clipboard practically fused to her hand, and an expression that looked permanently carved from lemon. Karen was the HOA president, self-appointed guardian of Maple Ridge's standards. Our first encounter came 2 days after we moved in. Sophie had drawn a rainbow across the sidewalk. Karen marched up, heels clicking like gunfire. "Excuse me," she said, eyeing the chalk dust on the ground. "This sort of mess lowers property value. Sidewalks are shared spaces," I smiled politely. "She's 7. It'll wash away with the next rain." Karen's lips pinched tighter. "Rules are rules. Perhaps you didn't read the HOA handbook I left in your mailbox." I had read it, all 43 pages of small print. It covered everything from trash bin placement to approved flower colors. Still, I brushed it off. People like Karen existed everywhere. The trick was not to give them attention, but Karen thrived on attention. The notes started next. Folded paper taped neatly to my front door. Please remove the ramp. It isn't aesthetically pleasing. Your dog's barking is disruptive to the peace of the neighborhood. Children's toys should not be visible from the street. Each one ended with her looping signature. Karen Miller, HOA president. Sophie didn't understand. "Daddy, why doesn't she like us?" I told her not everyone was kind, and that sometimes people hate what they don't understand. She nodded, though I could see confusion in her big brown eyes. Within a month, Karen had cornered me at the mailbox. "Mr. Turner," she said, "about that ramp. It violates our design code. It's too industrial." "It's ADA approved," I replied evenly. "My daughter needs it." She gave a tight, fake smile. "Of course. But perhaps you could make it less visible. We do have to maintain curb appeal." I wanted to tell her what curb appeal meant to a child who couldn't climb steps. Instead, I simply said, "The ramp stays." From that moment on, I became her new project. She began patrolling past our house every morning, jotting notes onto her clipboard. If Sophie's soccer ball rolled onto the grass, a violation notice appeared. If Max barked twice in a row, another one followed. When Sophie's friends came over to play, Karen would appear at the edge of our yard, arms crossed, pretending to water her flowers while glaring like a warden. I started getting emails from the HOA board, all mysteriously authored by Karen, citing community concerns. I ignored them, paid my dues on time, and kept my head down. But inside, a slow burn began. See, people assume authority makes you powerful. Experience taught me restraint is what makes you dangerous. I dealt with warlords, cartel leaders, and informants who'd kill over a glance. A suburban tyrant with a clipboard didn't scare me, but she was poking at the one thing I couldn't tolerate: my child. One evening, I came home from work to find Sophie sitting on the porch steps, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Daddy?" she whispered. Mrs. Karen told me I can't play outside because I make too much noise. Behind her, I saw the chalk bucket overturned, colors scattered across the walkway. Karen stood at the end of the driveway, pretending to check her phone, a smug smile twitching on her lips. I walked past her without a word, collected the chalk, and told Sophie to draw as much as she wanted. The next morning, I woke to find the drawings washed away and a fresh note on the door. This is your final warning. Repeated non-compliance will result in HOA penalties. For the first time, I pinned the note to my corkboard instead of tossing it. Evidence, small, petty, but building. To the rest of Maple Ridge, Karen was dedicated, a woman who kept the neighborhood beautiful. To me, she was a ticking clock counting down to an inevitable explosion. I didn't know when or how she'd cross the line, only that she would, and when she did, she'd discover that the quiet father next door wasn't just another homeowner. He was the FBI police chief, and he was done staying quiet. For a while after that last final warning, things went quiet, too quiet. Karen's morning patrols stopped, her gossiping voice disappeared from the cul-de-sac, and I almost let myself believe she'd moved on to a new target. But bullies don't stop. They reload. The first sign came through Sophie's school backpack. A crumpled note written in the same looping handwriting that had decorated my front door for weeks. Your child's behavior is upsetting other parents. Maybe she should learn how to act normal. No signature, of course. Just that same sour perfume on the paper. I confronted the school office and they looked baffled. No one's complained, the secretary said. Yet that afternoon I saw Karen's silver SUV parked across from the playground, window half rolled down. Her phone pointed at the children like she was filming evidence. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I started taking pictures of my own. Every evening I'd find something new. The ramp screws loosened. Deep scratches on Sophie's wheelchair tires. Once, someone dumped motor oil across the bottom of the ramp, slick enough to make it dangerous. Each time I logged the date, the photo, the time. I reported it quietly to local law enforcement, but without direct proof, it went nowhere. Karen knew how to stay just inside the line of the law, like a cat circling the edge of the fence. Then the gossip started. Neighbors began greeting me differently, polite but distant. When I waved, they hesitated. I overheard one whisper at the mailbox. Did you hear? His daughter broke a car mirror and he blamed Karen. She's just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. I could have crushed the rumor with a single phone call, but I held back. Let her dig her hole. I'd be there when it caved in. One Saturday morning, Sophie and I were in the yard planting small marigolds. Karen appeared, of course, wearing gardening gloves that matched her lipstick. Those flowers aren't on the approved list, she said sharply. Orange is not a community color. They're flowers, not flags, I replied, her jaw clenched. Rules keep order. If you can't follow them, maybe Maple Ridge isn't the right fit for you. Sophie looked up at her, frightened but defiant. They're pretty, she said softly. Karen's eyes flicked toward my daughter, cold and dismissive. Well, sweetheart, some people think rules are pretty too. Then she turned and walked away, heels crunching over the gravel like the closing bars of a march. That evening, the flowers were gone, yanked clean from the soil. Only the roots remained, twisted and broken. Sophie cried herself to sleep, clutching one wilted stem. I sat on the porch until midnight, a cup of coffee turning cold in my hands, watching Karen's living room light flicker through her blinds. Every instinct I'd learned over years of interrogation told me she was escalating, testing boundaries to see how far she could push. And I could feel that moment coming, the one where I'd have to stop being the polite neighbor and become what I truly was. Still, I played along. The next HOA meeting, I showed up early, uniform pressed, badge tucked out of sight. Karen arrived late, as always, the room immediately bending around her. She spoke about community order and problem homeowners, never naming me directly, but making sure everyone knew who she meant. When it was my turn to speak, I simply said, some of us came here for peace. Some of us confuse control with peace. Let's remember which one keeps neighbors safe. Then I smiled and left before she could answer. Outside, she caught up to me in the parking lot. You think you're clever? She hissed. I know people in this town. One complaint from me and you'll be gone before you unpack those boxes. I leaned close enough that she could see her reflection in my sunglasses. "Try it," I said quietly. "Just make sure your facts are in order." Her smile wavered, just for a second, and then she walked away. For the next week, things almost felt normal. Sophie laughed again. The neighbors even started talking to me like nothing had happened. I wanted to believe the storm had passed. But on Friday afternoon, I got a call from the school nurse. "Mr. Turner, Sophie's fine, but..." There was an incident at recess. A parent got aggressive with her. My blood ran cold. "Who?" The nurse hesitated. "Mrs. Miller. She said she was trying to discipline the children. Security is handling it, but you might want to come." As I hung up the phone and grabbed my jacket, the slow burn I'd carried for months ignited into a single, focused flame. Karen had crossed the line at last, and she was about to find out what happens when a bully picks a fight with a man who doesn't just keep the peace. He enforces it. The day it happened started out ordinary. Sophie had a science fair at school. Her project was a homemade volcano painted red and gold. She'd spent all week talking about it, bubbling with excitement. I promised I'd leave work early to see it. The morning was bright, calm, and deceptively peaceful. If I'd known what was coming, I never would have let her go alone. By noon, Maple Ridge Elementary was alive with laughter. Kids ran between tables, showing off projects built from cardboard and glue. Sophie's volcano sat proudly on her table, tiny streams of red paint dripping down like lava. Her teacher told me later that everyone loved it. Even Karen's son Dylan had stopped by to look, until he accidentally bumped Sophie's table. The model slid, teetered, and crashed to the ground. The papier-mâché split open and Sophie's face fell. Dylan apologized, flustered. But before anyone could clean up the mess, the air changed. Karen was there. She'd been volunteering that day, wearing her HOA community liaison badge like it meant authority everywhere she went. I can picture her now, high heels clicking on the tile, sunglasses pushed onto her head, a clipboard clutched like a weapon. When she saw the spilled volcano and Sophie's wheelchair beside it, something snapped inside her. "She did that on purpose," Karen shrieked. "You always play the victim, don't you?" The teachers rushed forward, trying to calm her down. "Mrs. Miller, please?" But Karen was already storming past them, her voice echoing through the cafeteria. "She's out of control. That ramp, that noise, that..." And then she reached into her tote bag. Witnesses later told the police she always carried tools, claiming she used them to fix playground benches. But that day, what she pulled out wasn't a screwdriver. It was a hammer, a small one with a chipped wooden handle, the kind that fits neatly in a clenched hand. For a second, no one moved. Teachers froze. Kids stared. Sophie, scared and confused, lifted her arm defensively, as if that tiny hand could stop what came next. Karen shouted, "Maybe this will teach you to behave!" The hammer swung down. The sound and that sharp, sickening crack tore through the air like a gunshot. Sophie screamed. Her project shattered, and for a heartbeat, the entire cafeteria went silent. Then chaos erupted. Teachers grabbed Karen. Kids cried. One teacher snatched the hammer from her grip, her knuckles white from how tightly she'd held it. Karen fought them off, shouting that Sophie had attacked her first. Her voice was wild, trembling with twisted satisfaction. Sophie lay on the floor, her tiny arm bent at an angle it should never bend. Tears streamed down her face as she gasped for breath. "Daddy," she whispered, though I wasn't there to hear it. The nurse rushed in, calling for paramedics. Someone finally called 911. Karen stood in the middle of the chaos, hair messy, face red, breathing hard. And then she smiled. Not nervous, not guilty, satisfied. By the time I got the call, the paramedics were already on scene. The nurse's voice over the phone was shaky. "Mr. Turner, it's your daughter. She's stable, but you need to come now." I broke every speed limit between the precinct and the school. When I arrived, flashing lights painted the walls red and blue. Parents were gathered outside whispering. Reporters hadn't shown up yet. Not yet. As I pushed through the crowd, one officer stepped forward trying to calm me. "Sir, the suspect's in custody. We've got it handled." I showed my badge. "No, you don't." Inside, I found Sophie on a stretcher, her arm wrapped, her cheeks still wet from tears. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Daddy, she hit me. She hit me with a hammer. Something primal rose in me, that deep, quiet rage that soldiers learn to leash but never lose. I kissed her forehead and promised, "You're safe now." Then I turned to the officers. "Where is she?" Karen sat in the principal's office, wrists handcuffed, eyes cold. The moment she saw me, her smirk faltered. "You!" she spat. "You're behind this." "You and that—" I stepped closer. "Finish that sentence," her jaw tightened. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was defending my son. Defending him from what? A 7-year-old in a wheelchair? She turned away, muttering something about disrespect and rules. The officer beside me said softly, "She's claiming it was self-defense." I looked at the hammer in the evidence bag, stained with red paint from Sophie's project, and a faint trace of something darker. "Book her," I said. "Felony assault. Child endangerment. And make sure the DA knows this isn't over." As they led her away, Karen's voice echoed down the hallway. "You think you're powerful, Turner? You think that badge makes you untouchable? This neighborhood is mine!" Her words didn't matter. Not anymore, because that was the day the line between law and vengeance blurred. The day Karen Miller stopped being a nuisance and became my mission. That night, as Sophie slept in a hospital bed, her tiny arm in a cast, I sat beside her and watched the monitors beep. Outside the window, the world kept moving, unaware that one man had just made a promise he intended to keep. Karen thought she'd broken something beyond repair. She was wrong. She'd awakened something instead, and as I stared into the dark, one thought burned in my mind like a vow. You hurt my daughter. Now, I'm coming for everything you love. The drive from the hospital back to the school felt endless. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my pulse a dull roar in my ears. Sophie's cries kept replaying in my mind, that small, trembling voice. "She hit me, Daddy." Every word was a knife. When I pulled up, the place was a circus. Blue lights flashed. Teachers huddled near the doors, whispering in shock. A few parents held their kids close, shielding their eyes from the sight of Karen being led out in handcuffs. Even in cuffs, she had that same smug, twisted calm. Her hair was messy now, mascara streaked, but her chin was lifted high like she was the victim in all this. I stepped out of my car. The crowd parted. They knew I wasn't just a parent anymore. Something about the way I moved made it clear this wasn't my first crime scene. A local sergeant recognized me immediately. "Chief Turner?" "Yeah," I said, flashing my credentials. "She's mine." We walked inside. The hall smelled like bleach and panic. Sophie's broken volcano still lay scattered across the floor. Bits of red paper, the tiny flag that read, "Mount Amazing," torn in half. I crouched down, picked up a piece, and held it in my palm for a moment. Then I straightened up and entered the principal's office. Karen sat there, wrists cuffed, tapping her foot like she was waiting for a meeting to start. Her lawyer hadn't arrived yet, just 2 patrol officers and the principal, pale and sweating. When I walked in, Karen's eyes met mine, and I saw it, that flash of recognition, the faint quiver of fear. "You!" she hissed. "I should have known you'd make this about you." I didn't answer. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my badge, and placed it on the desk between us. FBI police chief engraved in gold. Her eyes widened. You're law enforcement?" I nodded once. "And you," I said quietly, "just committed felony assault with a deadly weapon against a child." The principal swallowed hard. "We've already called child services, sir." I'll handle it," I interrupted. My voice came out lower than I intended, calm, but carrying the weight of every line I'd ever drawn between justice and rage. Karen tried to laugh, but it came out as a shaky hiss. "You can't threaten me. I know people. I am the HOA president." I leaned closer until my reflection filled her eyes. "Not anymore, you're not." Her smirk faded. For the first time, I saw the cracks, the panic beneath her arrogance. She tried to spin it, claiming Sophie had attacked her, that the hammer had slipped. The more she talked, the deeper she dug herself in. I let her rant until her voice broke. Then I said, "You've been warned. You harassed my family for months, vandalized my property, targeted a disabled child, and now you've crossed the line. The law isn't a suggestion, Karen, it's a promise." One of the officers looked to me. "Chief, you want her transferred to county?" I nodded. "Now." And make sure her statement's on record before her lawyer tells her to shut up. As they let her out, she twisted back toward me, shouting, "You think you're better than me? You think you can take everything I've built?" I didn't reply. Some words don't deserve answers. After she was gone, I sat alone in that office. The weight of my badge felt heavier than ever. In the field, I'd seen warlords with less cruelty in their eyes than that woman. The thought that she'd been free to roam my daughter's school made my stomach turn. When I finally returned to the hospital, Sophie was asleep, her arm in a cast, breathing steady. I sat beside her and brushed her hair back from her forehead. The nurse came in quietly. "She's lucky," she whispered. "Another inch and that blow could have shattered her elbow." Lucky. The word echoed in my head like an insult. Karen would spend the night in a holding cell, but I knew people like her didn't crumble fast. They fought. They clawed. They used every connection they had to twist the truth. So I spent the next hours doing what I did best, investigating. I pulled every file the HOA had filed against us. Every complaint, every photo she'd taken. And then, one by one, I started tracing her actions through public records, school reports, and neighbor statements. By dawn, my office wall was covered with evidence: notes, letters, timestamps, photos. Karen hadn't just harassed my family. She'd done this to others too. A dozen families over the last few years. She'd bullied, fined, and blackmailed them into submission, using her HOA title like a badge of her own. But this time, she'd picked the wrong opponent. As the morning light spilled through my blinds, I looked at the stack of evidence and made a quiet promise to myself. You wanted control, Karen. You wanted power. Now you'll see what real power looks like. Outside, the neighborhood was just waking up. Sprinklers hissing, birds singing, as if nothing had happened. But under that perfect suburban calm, the ground was already shifting, because the man Karen thought was just another homeowner was now preparing to do what he was trained for: bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable. The morning after Karen's arrest, Maple Ridge was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Half the neighborhood whispered sympathy for her. The other half hid behind curtains, afraid they might be next. That's what fear does. It silences people until someone finally fights back, and I was done being silent. I started the same way I'd built every case before, with facts. No emotion, no bias, just truth stripped down to its bones. I opened a new file labeled Operation Accountability. First, I contacted my team at the Bureau, people I trusted, the ones who didn't flinch when power or politics got messy. Within hours, they pulled background data on Karen Miller. What they found wasn't just a pattern, it was a career of manipulation. Over 7 years as HOA president, Karen had filed more than 60 official complaints against her neighbors. 20 were for unsightly decorations, 10 for non-standard window tints, and at least 15 involved threats or fines against families with children or disabilities. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. She'd inflated HOA dues to fund beautification projects, then hired her cousin's company to do the work. She'd reported a single mom's dog as dangerous so she could get the animal removed after a disagreement. She'd even forged signatures on board approvals to push through her own rules. Maple Ridge wasn't just her neighborhood, it was her empire. But empires fall. By noon, I had an evidence board in my office that could make a prosecutor salivate: harassment letters, photos, HOA records, timestamps, and witness statements from half the residents. The same people who once whispered, "Don't get involved," were suddenly lining up to talk. One elderly couple told me how Karen fined them $500 for keeping a bird feeder on their porch. Another neighbor admitted she'd been told to keep her special needs child indoors to avoid making the neighborhood look sad. And then there were the audio recordings, captured by a teenager who'd had enough of her insults. People are dragging this place down," Karen's voice hissed. "If I had my way, you'd all be gone." Those words became the nail in her coffin. I presented everything to the district attorney by evening. He read through the file twice, exhaled sharply, and said, "Chief, this woman's not just a bully, she's a public menace. Let's make it official." Within 24 hours, the charges stacked higher than any HOA fine Karen had ever written. Assault with a deadly weapon, child abuse, harassment, vandalism, intent to harm. It was enough to keep her behind bars for a very long time. The next step was the HOA board itself. I attended their emergency meeting that weekend. The atmosphere was thick and you could almost taste the tension. The board members sat stiffly around a polished oak table, faces pale, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Karen's chair sat empty, her nameplate still gleaming under the fluorescent lights. When I entered, the room went silent. No uniform this time? Just me, the father whose child had been attacked, and the man who was now holding all their secrets in a folder under his arm. I placed the evidence on the table. "This," I said, tapping the folder, "is what happens when power goes unchecked. You let her terrorize this community because you were too afraid to stand up to her." No one spoke. One man fidgeted with his pen. Another woman looked like she might cry. I continued, "Effective immediately, the Bureau recommends full suspension of the HOA. Financial mismanagement, falsified records, intimidation. I've already filed it with the county." A murmur rippled across the room. The woman finally found her voice. "You're shutting us down?" I nodded. No, she did. "I'm just making sure it's permanent." By Monday, word spread across Maple Ridge. The HOA was dissolved. The signs vanished from lawns. The rules were torn down, and the fear that had haunted that neighborhood for years finally cracked. For the first time, kids laughed outside again. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months began sharing coffee on their porches. It felt like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. But victory didn't feel sweet. Not yet. Because while Karen's empire was crumbling, she was still sitting in a county cell already scheming her next move. I knew her type. She'd plead insanity, claim temporary loss of control, spin the story until she looked like the victim again. But this time, the facts were louder than her voice. When the case went public, the footage from the school, the hammer, the screams, the teachers pulling her away, hit the news cycle. It was impossible to defend. Even her so-called allies in the community stepped back. For years, Karen had ruled through intimidation. Now, the same people she'd silenced were testifying against her one by one. The DA called it one of the most open and shut cases he'd ever seen. But I didn't feel triumph, not yet. Not until I saw Sophie smile again. That night, when I tucked her into bed, she asked quietly, "Daddy, is the bad lady gone forever?" I brushed her hair back and said, "She's gone, sweetheart." "She can't hurt anyone ever again." Sophie smiled, eyes drifting shut. "Good," she whispered. "Then we can paint outside again." I sat there for a long time, watching her breathe, the house finally still. Outside, the streetlights glowed over a quiet neighborhood that no longer belonged to fear. Operation Accountability had done more than bring down Karen Miller. It had brought justice to everyone she'd ever hurt. And for the first time since moving to Maple Ridge, I believed the neighborhood was finally, truly, safe. Months had passed since Karen Miller was finally behind bars. The neighborhood had begun to breathe again, but every time I drove down Maple Grove Lane, my eyes scanned the houses instinctively, half expecting a shadow to flicker past a window. The trauma of her reign didn't vanish overnight, and it certainly didn't vanish from my daughter. Sophie's arm had healed remarkably. Physical therapy sessions became her battlefield. Small weights, stretches, and exercises she approached with a warrior's determination. Each tiny improvement made her grin brighter, her confidence stronger. The cast was gone now, and she flexed her fingers like a tiny champion, her smile wide and unbroken. The school had dedicated a swing on the new playground in her honor. It wasn't just a swing. It was a symbol of survival, courage, and innocence reclaimed. The plaque read, "For Sophie, brave, bright, unbreakable." Parents, teachers, and classmates gathered for the unveiling. Cameras flashed, voices cheered, and Sophie waved shyly, her hand still trembling slightly with excitement. I stayed in the background, letting her moment shine. For a brief second, I allowed myself to feel relief, that maybe the nightmare was over. But justice, I reminded myself, wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection, accountability, and restoration. Karen had tried to take control of our lives, to dominate through fear. She had used the hammer as her weapon, but we had wielded truth and courage in response. The scars she left would fade, but the lesson would last a lifetime. Her house on the corner, once immaculate, a symbol of her self-proclaimed authority, now sat vacant. A for sale sign swayed in the breeze, peeling at the edges. The lawn was overgrown, weeds overtaking the carefully manicured hedges she had demanded neighbors prune to perfection. It looked abandoned, haunted even, as though the walls themselves remembered the terror they had sheltered. I stood on our porch, watching Sophie chalk hearts and flowers along the new sidewalk. Her laughter carried in the wind, fragile but fierce, a melody of life overcoming fear. She looked up at me, her brown eyes searching. "Daddy," she asked softly, "will Karen come back?" I crouched to her level, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The words formed easily, but the weight behind them was heavy with experience. "No, sweetheart," I said, voice firm, steady. "Some people only learn when justice knocks harder than they ever did. And some people don't get a second chance." Sophie nodded, her small hand brushing the chalk marks she had made. "So, we're safe?" "Yes," I whispered. "Completely safe." The DA's office had assured me that Karen's sentence would be long with no early parole. Her schemes, lies, and manipulations had finally caught up to her. The legal system, which she had once flaunted and thought she could manipulate, had delivered accountability in full. I had spent months reviewing HOA documents, school incident reports, and neighborhood complaints. Each piece of evidence I had collected had strengthened the case, ensuring that no loophole could free her. The months of preparation, stress, and sleepless nights had all led to this moment, peace for my daughter and my family. Still, life didn't return to normal immediately. Sophie had nightmares at first, waking up crying that Karen was coming back with a hammer. I would sit by her bed, hand on her shoulder, whispering assurances until sleep returned. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent, replaced by dreams of playgrounds, birthday parties, and colorful chalk. I joined the neighborhood in small steps. I organized block parties and small gatherings, helping families rebuild trust in one another. Many parents admitted they had once feared speaking up, worried about retaliation from Karen or her allies. But the truth was undeniable. Fear had no place in a community, and courage could be contagious. We even started a neighborhood watch program, not just for safety, but to ensure no one could dominate or terrorize others under the guise of authority. Signs went up, neighbors trained together, and Maple Grove began to feel like a real neighborhood again. One built on respect, not intimidation. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I watched Sophie racing down the sidewalk with her friends, their laughter echoing across the street. I leaned against the porch railing, the wind brushing my face, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The monster who had broken my daughter's arm, who had terrorized our lives, was gone. Justice had been served. Not through vengeance, but through preparation, truth, and unwavering protection. And Sophie was healing, stronger than ever. She ran back to me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Daddy, look, I made a rainbow." I followed her gaze to the colorful chalk arch stretching across the sidewalk. It was imperfect, messy, but vibrant, alive. I smiled, kneeling beside her. "That's beautiful, Sophie, just like you." And as the sun set over Maple Grove, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I finally felt peace. Not the fleeting peace that comes from quiet nights or empty streets. Not the peace that waits in a courthouse or a cell, but the peace that comes from knowing the people you love are safe. That justice has been done. That the man they underestimated has kept his word. Because some threats are temporary, but courage and love, those are forever.